was trained as a young officer to march into Russia, exactly into that weather. So I'm prepared, but are you prepared? That is the question.
We're from Michigan.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming, and it is very much appreciated. So we have a little syllabus here which I distribute because some of the things may be a little bit confusing, and so when we hold on to this, then we can remember the next time and when we go home. So let me just, we are in the second discourse today, and it is on reform. So we had our first one, and we introduced ourselves, my two friends, and I myself, and we had a little movie about us. So we don't have to repeat that, but I'm glad to do it for those who were not here the last time. And so we had a self-introduction, and then we tried to get some vocabulary and some categories by which we can grasp better what the Pope, the new Pope, or not so new anymore, what he wants to say. Because we are flooded by a lot of information, of course, and he's a popular figure, and it's all these newspapers and magazines and so on. But that is one thing, but it can, instead of bringing us knowledge, it can also confuse who in God's name he really is now. And that is what we want to grasp. And in order to, during the campaign now, people say, well, you have experience, but you don't have any judgment. So we have to get the experience together and also the judgment, so the notions, the concepts, and so on, in order to really grasp and do justice to him. So therefore we talked last time about a model. You have it here. So the model is very simple. What we see in our culture wars on television, if it is about birth control, or if it's divorce, or stem cell research, or same-sex marriage, or whatever, these culture wars are not new, of course, and they are not only here, but they are rooted in a deep antagonism which has occurred only in the West. So we had 1,000 years of Middle Ages in which we had a relatively united type of a culture. It was a Catholic culture. It was on one side a Roman Catholic culture, on the other side an Orthodox Catholic culture. We would have a time diagnosis. The Pope is just now meeting with the Patriarch of Moscow and so on. That is the other Catholicism. But it was a relatively united culture. And then something happened. It split. How did it split? And it has not split anywhere else. What happened here in the West, that means in Europe really, that spread around the whole globe. So it was globalized. So what happened was, in the Christian community, which was some kind of uniformly educated by the church ruled everything practically, the whole education. So they were formed, and there was some philosophy which was called Scholasticism. Scholasticism came from Aristotle and from Plato, and people were all trained and educated this way. But then something happened. In the Christian community, some people became more educated than others. Some people used those categories from Aristotle and so on and applied them suddenly to nature and to man. And so that means a tremendous bend took place. People were directed with their mind upward to the infinite. Think of the cathedrals which you can see along the Main River and the Rhine River and the Danube and in southern England and so on. It goes all straight up into the sky, these Gothic cathedrals. And now the whole European culture bent around, and the human mind, instead of interested in the infinite, became interested in the finite world in terms of mechanics and physics and chemistry and biology and so on. And this is still going on. And nobody knows how we could bend that back. Of course, the monks in Three Rivers, for instance, they go on in this Gothic style, but not the rest of us, usually. So this is then what we call this dichotomy. So we had a traditional union. The church tried to defend this union. the terrible things which happened in the church, the Inquisition, the so-called holy and unholy Inquisition, had a good purpose, namely to keep the unity, but they used horrible means, and good purposes do not sanctify bad means. They invented waterboarding, which then went to the SS and then went to the CIA, and now Trump wants to do something worse than waterboarding, which is hardly imaginable what that would be, because waterboarding is the most terrible torture instrument. So this, it failed. It failed. So there was Galileo, for instance, one of them, and others, and they showed them the torture instruments, and we talked a little bit about this, and the truth came through anyway. It is not that the Holy Inquisition was entirely unholy. They wanted to protect the farmers in the Alps. They said, when we told them, and the New Testament says, and the Torah says, you know, the sun rises, and now we have to tell them the sun does not rise. And then or the earth moves. And then they say, if you're wrong in this, you were wrong in something else. And then credibility would collapse. So they were frightened of this. And we have that really with the pill encyclical still of Paul II, where he said, okay, if we change, there were doctors here from Kalamazoo, where in the commission voted 2-1 that Catholic women can take the pill and so on. But the Paul VI was frightened, and he said, well, if we suddenly change what we taught for 2,000 years, then people will not believe us anymore. And the opposite happened. A crisis happened, and people didn't go to confession anymore, and this crisis is still going on, and this Pope has to deal with this crisis. So, nevertheless, we have an original union, or a relative union. I mean, there were conflicts and so on. But then we have this antagonism, this disunion, this modern disunion, and this rages on. And there is no reconciliation in sight. See, when we say, for instance, okay, we have now homosexual marriages, and so the cardinal in New York protests against it, then what we say is, okay, cardinal, you don't have to assist their marriage, and you don't have to go to trial if you do it, and so on. So see, the secular side has won, and then we just accommodate the religious side a little bit, but the world goes on. And the cardinal remains where he is, and the world moves. So, and this happens in many, many ways. So we have this antagonism, and then the question is of the future, and we have to ask the Pope this too, is there a future reunion of what has split? And this is very important that there is something like this, because this antagonism between the sacred and the profane split moves also into the religious communities, so that they are split among themselves. So when you go to Judaism, you have the Orthodox rabbi in Grand Rapids, who has a house here now, and he will come here too. Then you have the Reformed rabbi, and you have the Conservative rabbi. They're all split on what grounds? How open you can be to the other side, to modernity. And the more open you are, the more you have to reinterpret Book Leviticus and the Genesis and the Sodom and Gomorrah and the letter to the Romans and the natural law and so on. All that has to be interpreted. The Pope has initiated a worldwide synod on the family, and if you read this, I have it here, then you'll see what a struggle this is, and how these people, these synod people, they have all their specialists, and they see all these problems about the family, and it's overwhelming, and then they come with their traditional view of the family and try somehow to sort it out or to make sense of it and so on. And the Pope is in the middle of all that. He called them in, and so see what the final conclusions are. So then the religious, and when the religious people, the Sunnis and the Shiites, or the Catholics and the Protestants, the Protestantism was the first adjustment of Christianity toward modernity. That means Luther was a saint. If he had not been in that conflict with Rome and so on, he had all the potential of a saint. The question of justification, how do I become justified? By my own works or by the sacrifice of Christ and so on. So that was the core question, and he was struggling with this for years and years and years. He went to confession 2-3 times a week to Father Staupitz and so on. And Father Staupitz said, don't confess anymore. Then he sent him to Rome and thought that was distract him and so on. Well, Luther did not see the bad things in Rome of Alexander VI, which you can see in the movies and so on. He was concerned with religious things more than scandals or whatever. So he came back, and then was 1517, next year, we celebrate the Reformation, right, the great spiritual revolution of the Reformation. So, and up to the day, then of course, you know that Protestantism was more open toward modernity and also more open to capitalism and so on. And you can see today that Spain is much less capitalistic than England, and Italy much less than Germany and so on. So the more Protestant countries became more modern, and the others remained backward, and that is true for the Orthodoxy too, as far as Greece is concerned, where you see this horrible economic catastrophe into which they have fallen. So it goes into our present life. And we want to be concerned with what is happening now. So whatever we say about history or whatever, we say it just for one purpose, namely for the purpose of where we are now and where we can possibly go, and how this Pope, as one of the figures besides the Dalai Lama or whatever, how they can possibly lead us or help us to go into this reconciliation of this deep antagonism. And it must not be a phony one, it must be genuine, because otherwise we will always collapse again. So since we have such a deep longing that things be reconciled, therefore we sometimes make up things and say, science has said this again, and now the antagonism is overcome. And then a few months later we see that science meant something else. Even the one who discovered the Big Bang is a Catholic priest from Belgium, and he wrote to Pius XII that the Pope cannot use this new discovery in order to justify Genesis or to make peace between the two sides. So it is a very serious thing. It goes to our own psyche. The more we reflect, the more you will see that. Ask yourself, to what extent am I religious? To some extent, how far am I secular already? To what extent do I vacillate? What did my grandmother in the Upper Peninsula think about divorce? What did she think about birth control and so on? What did my mother say then? The grandmother was probably at the same position like the Pope, no matter if she was a Baptist or whatever. And then comes the mother and she said, no, I'm against it, but sometimes you need it. And then comes the daughter, she cannot even remember what the grandmother thought in the Upper Peninsula. So that is it is not only a static type of thing, it is progressing all the time. And so I describe to you the context in which the texts which the Pope says, speaks, or writes, or so, into which they are embedded. Okay? So but the same thing we have to see now, and we want to do that here. We don't only want to see the Pope's argumentation, but we also want to see the counter-argumentations of the secular side. So what we have to say, if the Pope is against birth control, and he is, then we have to see where is this coming from. And in the back you always have Yahweh spoke to Moses, Yahweh spoke to Isaac and Jacob, and Yahweh spoke to Jesus, and Yahweh, in Arabic Allah, spoke to Muhammad, and so on. So this is the background where it comes from, and therefore we cannot simply say, well, you Muslim or you Catholic or whatever, get straight now and open up, be more modern, be with us or whatever. It is not so easy for him if he is really honest about his revelation and the traditions which are connected with the revelation. So, but the secular people are also split in themselves, because there are still some of them who are tolerant, who say, well, there may be clerical child abuse, but there are also the St. Joseph Sisters, and they had a college here, and they have a hospital, and they cared for the prostitutes downtown, and so they did wonderful things in the 100 years in which they were here. So not everything can be bad about religion. And so they are willing then to maybe to give buses to Catholic schools or whatever, and make some accommodations. But then there are also secular people who, the counterpart of the traditionalists or the fundamentalists, who say, religion is a childhood affair of the human species. We have to get rid of it as fast as possible. Look what they do over there in Syria and what they do in Iraq and so on. They kill each other and so on, as we did, by the way, too, here in the West. So therefore, let's get rid of this insanity as fast as possible, and they aim at a totally secular society. And it goes into our election there. Think of the evangelicals, and there are Catholics with them too, who have recently, made an impression again and helped one candidate at least to win, and may continue to do that. So the religion is still there, but there are people who would like to get rid of these last irrational, unenlightened elements of which in our culture. And we are doubly split in the States because our state organization is secular. It is they are the heirs of the encyclopedists in France, of the French Enlightenment of the 18th century, and so they didn't just make it up. It matured through a long time, and so are the amendments and so on. The whole government structure, all that is Enlightenment. The name of God does not appear in the Constitution, only in the end somehow a little bit, but it appears in the Declaration of Independence, but there it is the deistic God. That means Rousseau and Voltaire invented a new religion. When you make a revolution, when the third estate, the middle class, rebelled against the clergy, the first estate, and the nobility, the second one, they had to get rid of Catholicism, because Catholicism was a state religion, and as a state religion legitimated the king and the family and the nobility and the clergy and so on. So whoever makes the revolution has to get rid of the religion insofar as the religion is a means of social control for people. So as, for instance, Jefferson would say, Americans have to read the Bible. Why? Because then we can govern them better. That is a bourgeois type of a view. You see, only a secular man could say something like this. That means a religious man could never somehow functionalize religion or instrumentalize religion that way. So, nevertheless, this we have to see the antagonism, and we have to see that both sides are split in themselves. And it is then also there are struggles between the secular people, what to do about religion and so on. And so as there are struggles in the where the rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, says to the liberal one, you are not a real rabbi. You are not even a real Jew. You are a traitor. You endanger us and so on. And you see then, of course, the religion is endangered. And you see on our thing there, the roadmap which I gave you, that there are a lot of dead religions, right? Religions can die. So the Syrian religion is dead. The Persian religion is dead to a large extent. The Egyptian religion is dead. The Greek religion is dead. The Roman religion is dead. There are more dead religions than living ones. So God is eternal, but religions are finite, and therefore religions can always die. Religions rise when they can answer the so-called theodicy question: why me, O Lord? Why do I have breast cancer? Why does my wife have to die and leave the 7 children behind, etc.? So this is the theodicy question. When religion can answer these questions, it rises. When it cannot give an answer to it anymore, the religion falls. That means have an answer on the level on which people are, education-wise and so on. So somehow a theodicy which may have made complete sense a few centuries ago, as people have new experiences and new learning, the same thing which made sense for the grandmother does not make sense for the children anymore. So take 2 of these theodicies, for instance, the retaliation theodicy. That means, why do I have to suffer? Because my secret sins. I sinned somewhere. Antigone, in the Religion of Beauty and Fate in Greece, said, this is how we know how much we sinned. We know it from how much we suffer. From how much we suffer, we know how much we sinned. And that is deeply ingrained in people, even in modern people. It may come when they are in a crisis and so on, that somehow they must have done something bad. But if you test this theodicy, which the Jews have, which the Muslims have, which the Christians have, then you will see tested against Auschwitz. Can you say that 6 million Jews were gassed with Cyclone B because of secret sins? If you do that, you're in the Hitler camp. Because Hitler would say that they had to suffer because the Jewish high finance, Rothschild, financed these wars before and made this tremendous profit and pushed the Aryan nations once more into the Second World War, and that is why they have to die. Because the dying started with Pearl Harbor, when the European war became a world war. Then the work camps became death camps. So, but could one really say this, that this was retaliation for Rothschild's sins, when most of these Jews were working class Jews and low middle class Jews who died in the camps? Because the Rothschilds had long left Frankfurt and had gone to London, and now they're in Paris and New York. So if Hitler would have punished the wrong people. So this obviously, a God who would do this would be a monstrosity, and he could not possibly deserve our worship. So another thing is the test theodicy, that when something bad happens, you are tested. And that is also still widespread. But apply it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The 8 o'clock, August 8 o'clock in the morning, for a single airplane comes with one bomb. There is no real warning. The children sit in the schools with the nuns and take their breakfast out, and suddenly this thing explodes and radiates them all. Who was tested now in this whole thing? These children were tested, the nuns were tested, Lippert was tested, the pilot who is still alive, Tippett who is still alive and who thinks he did the right thing, or who was tested. One pilot committed suicide, the other pilot joined the Trappist monks in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I visited him. Another one wrote letters that we would never commit such a crime again. They put him into an Air Force insane asylum, where he jumped out of the window sometimes, and he died a few years ago from cancer. So, were they tested? But what kind of a God would that be who would test people like this? It would be utter blasphemy. And when the theodicy turns into blasphemy, then one better drops it. So there are other theodicies we don't have. But the point is that if religions cannot answer this theodicy question adequately anymore, they begin to decline or get into a crisis, and in a crisis you can either survive or you die. And so at this moment, no world religion has a theoretical theodicy answer. None of them. There are practical answers still. So when you die, the priest could come or the nun could say, suffer this with Christ. You are crucified like Christ, and so on. So the Christian could imitate Jesus. It may not theoretically make any sense, but practically it may be very helpful. So also, if somebody is a humanist, he may follow Socrates and die like Socrates, and somehow gather together in the intellect, having discourse to the very end, and so on. Being ironical to the very end, when he was laying there, he took his summer towel that was over him, he put it back, and he said, I forgot this morning to sacrifice to Aesculap. Aesculap was the god of health. There is a guy who was just executed, and he forgot to celebrate Aesculap, and so on. So there you have somebody who is ironical to the last moment of his life. And there is a new way to die. That is a fascist death. That has come only after the Second World War. That means you don't want to linger on in the hospital with your cancer or whatever, so therefore you die with lots of people, with a lot of noise, and so on. Like Hitler did, 1 million Russians attacking with their guns, and so on, the Americans bombing from the top on the whole thing, and 10,000 of people dying at the same time. And we had recently something where Lufthansa pilots took the whole airplane down into the Alps and crashed it, and so on. Well planned, the whole thing, and so on. So that there are 3 types how we can die in the West, by imitating one of them. But there is no theoretical theodicy at the moment which would be accepted. And no rabbi would use any of these two and would apply it to Auschwitz or to anything else any longer. There was one who applied it to the tsunami 200,000 people died in the tsunami attack, and he would say that these people came from those 12 nations who did not accept Israel. But this rabbi, he was not entirely in line with the other rabbis. He thought that people would be punished for sins they committed before they were born. That means he took the idea from Buddhism and Hinduism of the migration of the soul, which is not orthodox in terms of Judaism. Okay, so nevertheless, that was our issue about about the model, that we have the model in which we can somehow talk about the reports which come to us and what we can read in the newspapers. So then the topics there, of course, our topic is Pope Francis, and we started with the last time, and that means that we also talk about his predecessors and his possible successors, and we will do that a little bit today, and about the council and so on. And then we want to bring in somebody else, Romero. Romero, they wanted to repress the memory in Rome, repress the memory of Archbishop Romero, and they did it under the predecessors of Francis, and quite successfully. But then when Francis became Pope, he then arranged his canonization or beatification. So Romero is now beatified, and he is on the way to be canonized. That means on the way to be remembered as a saint of the church and so on. So this is a little thing, but it may help us, to approach slowly who that Francis may be and what his plans are in the future. So, and we will maybe look at a movie of both of them and to compare them, because both of them, one comes from Argentina and the other one from El Salvador. So Central American and Latin American people, Catholicism and so on, and they both had to face fascist governments. We maintain fascist governments and dictators in order to keep the nation under control, so that we can get cheap labor and cheap resources from there. And the question is what the church now, does the church continue to be with the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, or does the church side with the workers? And so Romero was as conservative as Francis was originally, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten these high positions if they were not. But the experience which he had, that his priests were killed by the Arena party and so on, then pushed him more and more to, well, we would say to the left or whatever, so that he felt closer to the people than to the fascist establishment, the bourgeoisie. He sometimes thought nobility, but El Salvador doesn't have a nobility anymore. Like we have no nobility. So we had Lord Baltimore, but he could stand it only for 3 years, and then he left as fast as possible. So we are purely a third estate country, we're a purely bourgeois country. And that is true for El Salvador and many of the other countries as well. They had a nobility for some time, so did Canada, but we were, through the revolution and so on, we purified it, I think, to the better, and but we can discuss that too. Okay, so then we will have to say something about the economic policy, because that came into the foreground. The Wall Street threatened the Pope already that he could, talk about the poor, but he couldn't go too far with all of this. The Pope called the communist closet Christians, and they thought it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke, it was quite serious. They are closet Christians, but we can discuss that too. And then there is this slippery Pope there, slippery slope thing there. That means very often the secular press does not know what the Pope now really says about divorced couples, about abortion, contraception, celibacy, women ordination, the treatment of homosexuals and lesbians, war in defense of Christians in the Near East, and so on. So the secular press is somewhat confused about his position, and maybe we can bring some clarification. What does Francis mean, for instance, if he says, if a person is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge? That went around through the press all over the place. Does it mean now that he will cancel Leviticus and cancel Sodom and Gomorrah and cancel the letter to the Romans and cancel the whole natural law? Very unlikely. So what does it mean then? So some have the suspicion that he makes these nice gestures, but that fundamentally he does not change anything in terms of the doctrinal interpretation of reality or the ethical orientation of action. So that is something very serious which we have to look at and see if we can put some clarity on it. So then there is the history. It is quite an interesting thing that, of course, the American world and the Slavic world, and we will talk about this, has moved into the foreground in the 20th century, as the Greeks were once in the foreground, as the Romans were once, as the British Empire was once. Europe is retiring. It is very much retiring. When you visit Frankfurt, you'll see how much they retire. So Europe cannot make one decision anymore without Putin or without Obama or without these two words. So, and the history is not moving to China, in spite of the fact that they may do well economically. History has moved beyond Europe, and it has moved into the Slavic world and into the American world, and in that sense we are really exceptional. Exceptional maybe in a different way as some politicians mean, but in that sense that we are in the light of the historical process and carry the whole responsibility which Rome or Greece or Egypt and so on once carried in the total evolution of the human species. So, and therefore, it is interesting that the Church first took a pope from the Slavic world, and then the Church took a pope from the American world, exactly from the two exceptional sides. So for once, the Church was on the point as far as the historical process is concerned. So, and then the causes of the economic crisis, of course, is almost as brutal as Bernie is. Bernie loves the Pope, and the Pope loves Bernie. So they have something in common there, and we can go this. We have to ask the question, of course, symbolism, is symbolism enough, or does one have to do more than symbolism? He also did wonderful symbolical things by remembering in New York, September 11th, the Pope stated, "This place of death became a place of life too, a place of saved life, a hymn to the triumph of life over the prophets of destruction and death, to goodness over evil, to reconciliation and unity over hatred and division." And he said all that without any thinking badly about the Islamic brothers. As a matter of fact, I had a few weeks ago, I had His Eminence the Ayatollah from Iran there, and we may meet in the Vatican. He will live in the Vatican, and he told me that the Shiites and the Catholics have a lot in common, and I could only agree to him. I'm not exactly sure now what they have in common, but I think we will find out as time goes on. So Pope Francis placed a white rose at the edge of the 9/11 memorial before the interfaith service at the museum, and the interfaith service was something really beautiful, namely many religions were present, and the Pope spoke for all of them and prayed with all of them. So the idea of a real universal and true church, because all the other churches now are still historical and particular and positive churches. So this longing that there may be a universal, a really Catholic church, a fully Catholic church. So that's what Catholic means, Katholein, it means universal. But when you say Roman Catholic, then you put a particularity before the thing, and you have a contradiction in itself. But if you put Geneva in front of it, you also have a contradiction. Yep. And if you put Wittenberg in front of it, you have the same problem, or Pittsburgh, or whatever. So therefore, we simply do not have this universal church yet, which would be a symbol of the kingdom of God on earth. But there is this longing in all the particular churches. Okay, and that brings us to the new discourse, then restoration. But I would like to stop for a moment and see if there's anything which you would like to, all three of us, to explain, words which I use, strange words, or events which I saw in a different way. Then please just tell me. Then we can go back for a moment. Is there anything which comes to your mind?
For those of you who are new, Barrett Leach is a Presbyterian minister, and Dustin Bird is an Islam. Is that the way to
and
say
a
it?
professor.
A Muslim.
Muslim,
Yeah,
okay.
professor of religion and philosophy.
A Muslim professor.
Yeah.
A Muslim professor,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Very good. Now we have a question there, yeah.
Could you talk a little more about theodicy?
Theodicy, yeah. So I mentioned two forms, right? And they are not only in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, but they were in other religions like the Greek religion as well. There are others. There is an eschatological theodicy. See, I shall make all things new. When you look at the book Revelation, the last chapters, the second chapter from the end, I shall make all things new is probably the greatest word in Christianity, the core word of Christianity. That means the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem, in which there will be no mourning anymore, there will be no death anymore. Even death, which is so universal, will stop. There will be no marriage anymore, there will be love, but no marriage anymore, because there will be no dying anymore. There's no need for marriage anymore neither. So this is, of course, that means the old will disappear, the old will be no more, and so on, the text says. And that looks as if the Creator God once more repented that he had created the whole thing, at least that something is wrong with it, and that it cannot simply be, somehow improved a little bit or whatever, that what has gone wrong has gone too deeply. So therefore, a new heaven and a new earth. And that could be a theodicy, an eschatological theodicy. But the problem is that, of course, Jews have now waited 2,800 years for this, and Christians have waited 2,000 years, and Muslims have waited 1,400 years for the Jesus Messiah, and nothing has come. And this is a long time for little people who live so shortly. And otherwise, it is still an acceptable theodicy, except that then, of course, the secular people say in one thing Jesus was really wrong, namely that he thought he would come back. So it is particularly the secular people who ask those theodicy questions, and the most rational type of atheism is the one which is rooted in these theodicy issues. So even if you think of Mohammed was very sensitive for this theodicy problem. So sensitive that he denied what is in all four Gospels, namely that Jesus was executed, that he was tortured to death on the cross. So he could not accept that the all-benevolent God would do something to such a wonderful moral person as Jesus, the Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth, and so on. So even Mohammed, but the atheists, if you think of Freud and Marx, both are Jews who both have assimilated by the modern secular culture, but remain Jews, of course, because Judaism is also civilization, Judaism is also a nation, Judaism is also a race. And so they remain Jews, of course, but they could not have faith. They had no faith anymore. And this was expressed, which I mentioned the last time, and Wiesel describes it in Auschwitz. They had a trial, they put God on trial. The charge was that God had broken the covenants which said that Yahweh had chosen this people and he would take care of this people, and now he did not take care of them. 6 million of them were killed, and so the trial found there were defense, and there was the people who brought the charges, and in the end the God was found to be guilty. They even thought that God had made a new covenant with Hitler and the Germans, and that somehow by doing that God now punished the Jews for all the crimes which they may have done in the last 4,000 years. So, but the interesting thing is that not all became atheists. Some of the Jews never prayed again, but others they put their hands on their head and walked into the gas chamber, which is a sign of humility and bowing down before God's will, even if you don't understand a thing of what he is doing. But that the state of Israel today, that 80% of them are non-believers, has something to do with this theodicy experience which the Jewish people had. And so when you go, I lived in some kibbutzim, in the secular, there are still some religious kibbutzim. You'll see that these people try to find other ways because they cannot trust Yahweh any longer, or that he is there at all, because of this theodicy experience. Okay, do we have any other question? Think about it. I hope that we can, create an atmosphere among us so that you feel good, and wherever you come from, that you don't think, if I say this, it sounds a little bit naive or so. Nothing sounds naive. Everything counts and is to be taken seriously. So, but it always depends, that we are not intimidated or whatever. And just say what you want to say. Here is the place. Okay, well, you can go on thinking about it. So we go to our discourse number 2, restoration. So we ask the question, is he engaged in restoration? Is the Pope engaged in reform, or is the Pope a revolutionary? The word revolutionary is not so bad anymore, since Bernie uses it every day about the political revolution he wants to make. So otherwise, socialism and revolution are horrible words in the American culture, which has something to do that the Civil War was the last bourgeois revolution, and therefore it was a horrible experience, as you know. We thought that there were maybe 500,000 people died there, but the Union Army, after they won, they didn't count the widows of the Confederacy, and therefore we had only half of the casualties, so it goes close to 1 million, and there were maybe 42 million Americans at that time. So it was a horrible, horrible catastrophe. Gettysburg, and the role which religion played in this, there were about 70 army chaplains on both sides, and they all told the soldiers that the more they killed from the Yankees or on the other side, the sooner they will go to heaven. They were all did strange type of things. So the army chaplain, since Augustine, is one of the most problematic people in the universe. So, but we don't have to talk about that. There was Father John here, who was an army chaplain, and we had great controversies, and he read my book. He never read anything, but he read my book somehow, and he found out that I had talked about him and about Vietnam and so on. So he stood on the altar and said, "Rudy, Rudy, the truth, the truth." I said, "John, let's go to the next restaurant and have supper together, and then you can tell me the untruth which I said, and then in the next edition I will change it." So well, we went to Bill Knapp's at that time, and we ate and we had a good time, but he never mentioned why we were there at all. He had forgotten it. He only told me that he had so much problems with his bishop in Lansing and here that he had to get out of the whole thing, and the army was the best way. But I said, there was still the question, you volunteered for Vietnam, you didn't have to volunteer for Vietnam, become a morale officer there. Well, we didn't talk about this anymore, but anyway, I didn't have to change anything. The truth was still there, and it's still there today. And so there was a very loving army chaplain. But since Augustine, since we have the marriage between church and state, we have army chaplains, and in all nations they are really problematic if you compare them with the Sermon on the Mount or the Gospels. But that's another theme. So we have here one point which says inner criticism. See, if we want to talk about the Pope and we want to say what he's doing and if that's right or not, that is of course a judgment, and we have to ask ourselves on what we base this judgment. And inner criticism means that one can critique a person only in terms of his own standards. So I cannot judge a communist by American capitalistic standards. I cannot judge a Muslim by Christian standards. I cannot move myself above all religions, and I would be godlike, and then judge them from, heaven knows, from what thing. So, therefore, the only way how one can do justice scientifically and otherwise can judge a religion or what is done is by its own core code. That means by its own interpretation of reality and by its own orientation of action. So that means we can compare, and the Pope himself would not be against this, that we compare him not with the Communist Manifesto, because he is not a communist, he says this, or by the American Declaration of Independence, but we can judge him by the Sermon on the Mount, and we can judge him by the Decalogue, and we can judge him by the tradition. And people sometimes think that he is so all-powerful, he is bound by the canon law, which is 2,500 canons, if he conforms to this or not. We can judge him by his own tradition, by the Roman tradition. We can judge him in terms of his predecessors and what they have done. People think that the Pope is infallible, therefore he is all-powerful or whatever, but that is an illusion. The Pope infallible does not mean that he can say what the weather in Michigan will be. Nobody can do that. Predict the weather here. So, but he can only somehow declare certain sentences to be true. But in order to do that, they have to be rooted in the New Testament. They have to be rooted in the tradition. And he could not arbitrarily. So a sentence, for instance, God created the world, that is a dogma. So something like that he could declare. Now when he declares the Assumption of Mary or the Immaculate Conception, then we have a great problem, because it is not in the New Testament. Or he has to ask the theologians to find it in the New Testament. And they have tried to find it, but it isn't there. So then he has only the tradition. There are two feasts which have been celebrated in the Orthodoxy and in Roman Catholicism. So he can only base it on tradition, and otherwise he has to wait for some intelligent theologian who may find something where nothing can be found. So that is very hard. So there you can criticize him by his own method, right? Because it is clearly established what ex cathedra, when he sits on his throne, what he can say, and that is very little what he can say, and it has to be based on 2,000 years or longer, or 4,000 years of the Jewish history included. Otherwise he cannot do it. So one has to see that there were of course tremendous struggles between the Pope and the Council. And the councils were, so in the end of the Middle Ages, much more powerful than the Pope. So he has not only the canon law, he has the cardinals, he has the episcopate, and he cannot arbitrarily do something what he thinks it's nice or it should be done, and so on. So he is very, I don't say that, in order to make that foul excuse that if he doesn't do anything with the Roman bank, that he cannot do this because he's not so powerful or whatever. So he has powers, but they are limited. So that is an important precondition. So nevertheless, if we talk about the Muslims, and we talk a lot of them, Dustin and I, we have a seminar for PhD people, and most of them are coming out of the desert, and we love them all.
Literally.
But we have to see that we do not impose on anybody else our own. So we have to know who we are and who they are, and we can only judge them in terms of their own Holy Quran and the 5 pillars and the Sharia law and so on. So when I say, what did you do with Gaddafi and so on, they tortured him to death. And young Islamic people, I would say that the Ummah and the Islamic courts are responsible for this. And before we send them to Den Haag, they should be tried by the Ummah and so on. So That means whatever Islamic people do, ISIS or whatever, it has to be, we can only judge them in terms of their own revelation and the ethical norms, which and one has to know them, of course, in order not to do injustice to anybody. Okay, so that was the point of inner criticism, and now comes the time diagnosis.
Rudy?
Yes.
Rudy, I wonder, just for the sake of, I'm anticipating what may be a question in some people's minds, could you just describe a distinction between the integrity of inner criticism vis-a-vis moral relativism, which I think is what a lot of people hear when they hear inner criticism described, and how it is that this is distinct, that this is not just another term for relativism.
If you look at the codes, then you will see that some things are different, but that they also have something in common, which none of them is willing to give up. And one of the things is the golden rule. So you find the golden rule in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus even says it's the summary of the whole law and the prophets. So you find the same thing in the Holy Quran, you find the same thing in Buddhism, and in all religions as far as we know them. So therefore it is not simply, that all that goes and is different and everybody has his own thing and does his own thing. And so they have different things, but they are in core issues, they are have amazingly common values. And that spans over into the secular side, because our family, our state, our civil society has moral preconditions. If people want to vote honestly, they have to have some kind of a moral basis underneath. If you do your duty to pay your taxes and whatever, there must be some kind of a moral basis. This moral basis was provided by the world religions. So what are you doing now when you reject them because of demythologization or whatever? You have to create your own, right? And they have started. So up to 200 years ago, up to the Great Enlightenment, all morality of people underlying the family and so on was religious. It was Buddhist, it was whatever. And then the Enlighteners started. It is interesting that the Enlighteners, first of all, were Christians, as we said before, and then became more and more learned and became less and less Christian and so on. But the first attack against Christianity was, it doesn't make people moral. It doesn't make people moral. That means they go to communion and they go to the sacraments, and now afterwards they are cheating and lying and killing and so on like everybody else. So that was the attack. And the horrible misunderstanding, of Marx is he is against religion. Marx was against bourgeois religion. He was against opium religion. What is that? He didn't get it from himself. He got it from his great teacher Hegel, and he got it from his great teacher Kant. And Kant said, religion, if it makes you feel good and at the same time dulls your conscience, that is bad religion. That is opium religion. So it's not bad that religion consoles us, it's okay. If not, at the same time, it dulls our conscience so that we live side by side with the north side on the other side of the radio station and feel nothing. Feel nothing. And feel nothing when there is a new war or whatever. So the conscience is dulled. That is bad religion. So the Enlighteners, and you see that Kant was the greatest of all Enlighteners, he started it and said, these religions, they even make people immoral by saying, if you go to communion and if you are confirmed and you go through the whole sacrament, you are fine and you live a God-pleasing life and so on. No, the Enlighteners said, you have to do something else. Somehow they went behind Luther again and went to the Catholic thing, the same thing what Luther had attacked in Catholicism with the good works and so on. So, not completely, but nevertheless, that was the point there to say, because the priests and so on make it too easy for people to get rid of their sins, therefore they somehow promote that immorality of people. Instead of saying, okay, you can go to the sacraments and so on, but you do have to do something else now. And the real thing is that you pull yourself up now and start to lie at least less, steal a little bit less, and kill a little bit less. For a starter, that's very good. So you know that the Islamic people, attacked Wall Street because of the stealing, and they attacked the Pentagon because of the killing, and they wanted to attack, if they hadn't been shut down in Pennsylvania, they wanted to attack the White House and the Congress because of the lying. So they are religious people there, and they know what they're doing. So there's also that one simply does not say to his enemy that he is a snake or evil or whatever. Whatever they, much we may hate them, they are human beings like we are, and they have brain too. They can think too, and it is much better, and one can defend oneself much better if one can look through the eyes of the other people toward what we look like, instead of simply being narcissistic and say, well, this is out there, and so on and so on. So that's why we call that intelligence, right? We have an intelligence apparatus, but it's not very intelligent if it does not look through the eyes of the other. We do train people, who are hired by the Army in order to find out, why these young men, they blow themselves up in God's name, and so and that is a good starter. Okay, so nevertheless,
it's hard to look through their eyes of other people like that, because we can't understand, how women have the role they have in their.
Yeah.
That's right. So hard for us.
Right. So we have some of these women there from the desert in our house, and they came last Wednesday, and they had their little prayer carpet. They went into my bedroom. There was never anybody on a carpet in my bedroom there. So, and they prayed to Allah, and we made sure that it was really the east there where they prayed to my bedroom. What goes into the east? That was good. It was the right room for it. So, but so this, yeah. I mean, that one. The point is, that we are a little bit narcissistic in our way, and I don't understand why we have so much trouble. I go to Russia, Dustin, we went to Russia, and we get along with everybody. I'm even an ex-German. I mean, we killed 27 million Russians, and they still know that where I'm coming from, and they still have they embrace us friendly. But the Russians are unbelievably friendly people. When they really love you, they kill you by loving you, but when they don't love you, they hate your guts, and they get really wild. It's really dangerous. So we have to see how we get back there to the whole thing, to the New Republic.
What is your stand on missionaries who go to other cultures and try to convert?
Yeah, I don't say that we should not judge others. I think we should judge ISIS, and we should judge them by their own standards. So to what extent does, what is the name of the fellow there who leads ISIS now there?
Al-Baghdadi.
Al-Baghdadi, yeah, Al-Baghdadi. So Al-Baghdadi is a very intelligent man. He speaks the classic Arabic, the New Arabic, and so on. He was in an American concentration camp in Baghdad for 4 years. And in that camp, ISIS was shaped and formed. So I don't say we cannot judge him, but we have to see to what extent he conforms to the Holy Quran or whatever the additions to it. And then we can discuss with him, and we can say even, what are your grievances, man? What is it? Why you do all this, what you do? And when he says, I do this because this and this is the Quran, we can see is really in the Quran, There's a long law tradition and so on. So, and if does he really understand his own thing, we could ask something like this. So we should not refrain from judging them, but not in our terms, in our standards, but by his own standards. And for this we have to read them. So if we say Bilal is this, he's not a real Muslim, but have we really read his letters and his speeches and so on, and see what he really does and what his theology is, and to what extent it is orthodox or whatever that is. So we can judge them, and we must allow them to judge us now. Siebert, what about the Sermon on the Mount? Do you love your enemy, or do you hate his guts, or whatever? So we must allow others to do the same thing, and they do. Yesterday, Trump said that this one guy, his opponent, that he is not a real evangelical Christian because he lies. He just lied. So he just took the norms of the evangelicals and took it seriously and applied it to his opponent. So, and the other said, you are divorced 3 times. So it's the same thing. So then he said, well, 3 times divorced too. So this. It has to be taken. It has to be done serious way. But what we can say is when we discuss the Muslims, then we have to do it in their own way, in their own codes, by their own codes, and we must allow them to just decode us, Is that what Jesus said, that we should assassinate every week? We should assassinate a leader or so? That sounds like Jesus to me. So, okay, but then you had something else beside this.
Missionaries.
Missionaries. So, not all religions are missionary religions, right? Islam is, and Christianity is, but Judaism is not, for instance. The Jews do not go out and do missionary work. Now, when we see factual, let's see Vietnam. Vietnam was the field for Catholic missionaries, sisters who were sent to France, from France to Vietnam, and they brought the French, before we took over, the French language and so on. Now, we have to ask, self-critically, why does the French state, which is an atheistic state, send Catholic nuns to do missionary work in their colonies? There's some similar thing which happened yesterday where Clinton wanted to tell people that she get $15 million from Wall Street, and that this did in no way move her to serve the interests of Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street is not completely stupid. If they invest something, they must be sure that it will have an effect, and you bet it will have an effect. So therefore, we have to ask now, in terms of these missionaries, should they not have known why they were sent there? And that maybe this atheistic bourgeois state instrumentalized them so that they would help to bring French language and culture to them. They needed Vietnam for rubber, and so the cheap labor and rubber sources and other resources. And so the nuns were instrumentalized in order to soften up somehow the population and integrate them and so on. So that is where then missionary activities, become questionable. And the same thing is when they send missionaries to Central America, South America, and so on. They wanted to have gold. And you have then real honest missionaries. Think of the missionaries in Uruguay and so on, who established a whole Jesuit state. They wanted to rescue them, the Indians the Native Americans from the conquistadors, and they failed in the end. But you have genuine missionaries who want to bring the good news to other people. Does that mean that the other people are all wrong, that they cannot get to heaven without these missionaries? The Catholic Church excommunicated the Jesuit, I think in the 50s or so, who said that the Roman Catholic Church alone can make people go to heaven. Though Catholicism does not teach that anymore. They could very well get to heaven. If they are sociological and psychological, think, McCain. McCain bombs Hanoi into pieces and then is shot down because the Russians sent new guns there. And then he is down there and he has this cross around his neck. And now a communist sees that. Should he convert to Catholicism or to Christianity after this experience? It's out of the question. So in that sense, Catholic theology would say the communist has to go to heaven through communism. And so in these sociological or psychological reasons that simply the religion, as the religion appears sociologically and so psychologically to these people, it's impossible that they can see that there's any truth in it whatsoever. So in that sense, a double thing, the missionaries. Jesus gave the order, to commandment that his disciples should go everywhere and should bring the message in the name of the Father and the Son and the Spirit, which may have come into the gospel a little bit later by the writers, but that is on the side. So that and so he has sent them, and they have done this since. And from a Christian point of view, that is a good thing and should continue. But then, when it is co-opted, by secular governments, then the missionaries have to be critical then and have to say, you cannot do this to us. We don't want to be the French Enlightenment. We want to bring the good news of Christianity to you, and not the other way around. And it can get very mixed up, I think. Okay, very good. Anything else? Any other question? Okay, so
Rudy, I have a question there.
yeah.
The overall theme today is restoration. Is he a restorer? But I don't think we've ever defined what exactly is he, if he is a restorer, what is he restoring?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we would like to do this maybe by seeing if there were other people who did restore before him, and if he goes on with this restoration or if he breaks with it. But before we do that, we want this discourse and the other two, we want to make a time diagnosis for a moment and a prognosis. What is that? We take an event and we analyze it in terms of our theme, in terms of the papacy and in terms of the present Pope. Something happens today. It's happened now. So time diagnosis means an event now. And we have to know enough about this event. Now, you never know about any event. We don't even know who killed Kennedy. We have a public version, but other people have doubts and so on. So it can take decades, it takes centuries in which the truth doesn't come out. But as much as we know the data and the facts and so on. So today, the Pope flew to Cuba. And when he started in Rome, there was wind and it blew his little cap off his head. They had to struggle with the staircases and with the wind and so on, but he finally made it in the airplane and he flew to Cuba. And in Cuba, he will meet with the Patriarch of Moscow. That is a unique type of a thing. It's not that it happened the first time or so, but nevertheless, they will talk with each other 2 or 3 hours in Havana. Then he will go to Mexico from there. So at the same time, our Secretary of State is meeting with the Russian counterpart in Munich. They have met, and they have come to an agreement about the Syrian situation, some kind of an armistice, so that the refugee problem can be solved and so on. So now these, how do these things fit together and so on? Cuba, of course, had this relation with Russia all the time, and so somehow that the Pope will visit Cuba, that makes Putin also happy. Maybe Putin will invite him, and what we play there, that we'll see what happens and so on. So, but let's concentrate for a moment on this patriarch there. It was in 1056 that the split occurred. Now here you have something. There is the united Christianity in antiquity. Well, not all over united, but nevertheless you had the Orthodox Church in Constantinople, and then you had the Pope in Rome. So that means the Pope in Rome was the 7th Patriarch, or the 8th Patriarch. That means this Pope there, he is a Patriarch, nothing else, right? So he is first of all the Bishop of Rome, and then he was the Patriarch. But he was far out, the character, because all the other patriarchs were in Alexandria. There is one now, is called Pope. And there was one in other places, so 7 altogether. Now, so they all were thinking the same, but this fellow here, he had a particular position. Why? Because of the following thing, and I want to read that to you. So, all the councils took place in the East. So all the Nicaea and so on were Eastern councils. But the Pope usually was invited. That means the Patriarch of the West was invited. If he wasn't there, they would send their decision to him so that he would sign it or would agree with it and so on. So it was some kind of a primacy, an honorary primacy. So he was somewhat the first. Why? Because of this. See, ultimately we have to go back to the Gospels because they're all bound by the Gospels. So we have now 6 paradigms through which Christianity has gone. The Jewish Christian paradigm, the Orthodox paradigm, which is older than the Roman one, the Roman Catholic paradigm, the Protestant paradigm, the Enlightenment paradigm, and now maybe a new ecumenical paradigm, or so, number 6 there. So now, but all that goes back to this here. Let me just read that. Usually we do biblical text in the beginning, but we may start here or not. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, it's the Mediterranean, he put his question to his disciples. Who do people say the Son of Man is? The Son of Man comes from Daniel, and Jesus only gave himself this title, probably, Son of Man, from Daniel. He never called himself anything else. So, and they said, some say he is John the Baptist, that was Jesus' teacher. Some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. But you, he said, who do you say I am? Then Simon Peter spoke up. You are the Christ, that means the Messiah. He said, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, Simon, son of Jonah, you are a happy man, because it was not flesh and blood that revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. So I now say to you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the underworld can never hold out against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth shall be considered bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be considered loosed in heaven. Then he gave the disciples strict orders not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. And later on, of course, there is this catastrophe where Peter says, don't go to Jerusalem, they will kill you. You provoked them and they will kill you. And he said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. So there was a swing of mood swings, we would say, there, and they were very passionate people. So, but this one is, of course, important. So the Patriarch of the West said that Peter came to Rome, and that in Rome he was the first Western Patriarch, Peter was. And during the Second World War, Prelate Karst, the leader of the Catholic Center Party, who gave Hitler the emergency laws by which Hitler became legitimately a dictator. We have the same in our constitution. If we have a catastrophe in the country, the president can ask for the emergency laws. Roosevelt didn't. He introduced the New Deal instead. And then the Congress will be sent home and the president will act by executive order. That is why it is so dangerous when he does that too often, because then people have the feeling we are going to an emergency situation. So, and you hear this discussion sometimes, but every president does it anyway. So, nevertheless, this Karst fellow, then after Hitler got the emergency powers, he dissolved the Center Party and the Social Democrats, to which Bernie belongs, and the Communists and everybody else. So, and then Karst was so ashamed that he left for Rome, and then he started digging for St. Peter's and Paul's graves under the cathedral. And he did that during the whole war. So when Germans came to visit him, to talk with him, he said he had no time. He had to find St. Peter's grave down there. So that was the way how he could hide his shame of what he had done. So nevertheless, it was never found, by the way. So, but there are stories and traditions that Peter was crucified upside down in Rome, and that Paul was also crucified in Rome. And if this can be verified, as far as I know, is that Karst did find graves, but no proof that it was really St. Peter's grave and so on. But the tradition, nevertheless, is there. So there's always the question, how far is Roman Catholicism? I had this discussion with that eminence, the Ayatollah, and there was a Christian there also, and I said, we Christians. And he said, no, you cannot say that. You belong to Romanism. I said, well, where the hell did you get that from? And so on. So nevertheless, Romanism, that was something. So nevertheless, this, that is now down there, so this is the basis. And therefore, all the other patriarchs, they are willing to listen to him or to meet with him and so on. So therefore, it's nothing unusual that he now meets that patriarch. And what will they do now? That's the important thing. will talk with each other about the persecution of the Christians in the Near East. So in Iraq, in Iran, and so on, there are all Christians who are Orthodox. Some are united with Rome, like in the Ukraine you have Orthodox, and some Orthodox are also united with Rome again. So nevertheless, they have a common cause there in order to make some proclamation or go to governments and try to find help so that these Christians are not killed anymore. By the way, when we would look through the eyes of the Muslims who do that killing, the question is, if they kill them because the Holy Quran tells them to do that, which is very unlikely, or if they do that because those Christians are seen as representing the West, because they may get some money from there or whatever. And so I'm just putting that out as a question, because we have to be careful. And the motivation in every crime which happens, the motivation is very important. So nevertheless, now, so that's fine what they're doing, that they get together. But the real question is the reunion. They are now for over 1,000 years. Jesus said, "Be one like the Father and I are one." And they are not one. They had a council in Frankfurt by 1800 and so on, by 800, and it was the icon question. The West thought these icons were a little bit idolatrous. And so over the icon question, misunderstanding probably of the icon question, you can go to Athens and you see a whole museum full of them. So over that, the split came about. The split is a schism between Catholicism and Protestantism. That is a heretical schism. But this is not a heretical schism. They have the same doctrines and the same morality. There's only one thing, which is a dialectic, the philosophical problem, if the Holy Spirit comes from the Father and the Son, or only from the Father. And the West added "and the Son," and they are dialectically more correct in doing that, philosophically more correct. But nevertheless, this has hardly played any role in any heresy trial or whatever. Okay, so they are a schism. That means a split in the organization of the church, but not a split in their doctrines. They are very similar or the same. But now, what has to come about now, since his predecessor already, the predecessor, is how this schism of 1056, from Frankfurt, how that could be stopped, because it is in contrast to the Gospels. That means Jesus didn't teach this type of division. He wanted his followers to be one, and they are not one. So therefore, they are against the will of their founder. And so, why doesn't he do it now? So they will embrace a lot and they kiss each other, but it doesn't go any further. It doesn't get anywhere, this whole kissing thing. Where is it supposed to go? Well, the reunion. And why can this reunion not happen? It cannot happen because of a tiny little thing. All what this good man here would have to say, we are equal, we are what is the formula?
Primus inter pares? Is it primus inter pares?
Yes, say it again.
Primus inter pares?
Primus inter pares, yeah, right. The first among equals.
Right.
Yes.
So that is the thing. So if he would say that I am the first among equals, the Patriarch would have no problems whatsoever. And neither would the Patriarch in Alexandria or Caesarea or whatever. And the Archbishop of the Anglican Communion would also have no problems and so on. But he can't say it. Why can he not say it? He thinks he is the first among unequals. This little word, equals or unequals, that is where everything hangs on. So now, if you say, is he now restoration, or is he reform, or is he revolutionary? That little thing would think, if he can say, I am the first among equals, we are all equal archbishops of these areas. It happened by history that I got this extraordinary position because Constantinople had a military presence in Ravenna, and therefore we couldn't protect you adequately, and therefore the Patriarch of Rome became also a political figure, and he grew in stature, so that in the in late Middle Ages, he owned practically North and South America and everything. So Innocent III, at the time of St. Francis, would be the most powerful of them. So, and when Attila, for instance, came to Italy, who visited him in the Piave River on a little white horse, Leo came, and he talked with Attila, and Attila withdrew and didn't march to Rome anymore. He went home to Danube, got married, how many times, I don't know, and got a heart attack in the wedding night. Served him right. So nevertheless, there was no attack. Now, the other one is for Genghis Khan, 600 years, 700 years later, that it broke through. Genghis Khan broke through. By the way, if you hate the Russians, remember the Russians held these Asian invasions back. These were the only ones, Attila and Genghis Khan were the only ones who broke through. If the Russians hadn't been there and had not stopped them there would have been one attack after the other, and there would not have been any Europe. So therefore, simply to say the Russians are not Europeans or whatever, and have this hostility, and with Napoleon marching in with 800,000 men, then Hitler marching in with 4 million men, and now the NATO is in Lithuania and in Warsaw and so on, all over the place. I mean, it could stop really. This idiocy could really stop now. So, nevertheless, so this is the meeting now when we want to pass a judgment. It's wonderful that they are meeting. It's wonderful that they are kissing each other. And it is also wonderful that they want together do something for the Christians in the Near East. But what really has to be solved is their reunion now. By what standards? By the New Testament. The New Testament, the teacher, the founder of Christianity, demands this unity, and they have been apart now long enough. Will he do something about this or not? Is he prevented by his own doctrine not to say equals? No, not at all. There is no hindrance. It is just a power claim. Therefore, it could easily be changed without him losing face. Yes.
Isn't he trying to demonstrate that he's equal by not living in a lavish way? And
yeah, right. So he's very humble, and there is a lot of symbolism, and he doesn't drive in a Mercedes or a Cadillac, and he lives in a simple apartment. This is all wonderful. But these are symbols, Now, that would be a structural thing. So is he staying with the appearances now, or does he really make a structural change and say, from now on, we say primus inter pares, and not the first among unequals? That would be and that is the difference, between what the journalists also say. We don't know where he really stands, because he gives those beautiful signals. But will he really change the moral norms? Will he really change the doctrine? And we could ask, is there a doctrine which prevents him to say this, because there is a long tradition, and this tradition was really threatened only in 1870 by the First Vatican Council, in which the Declaration of Independence, in which this declaration was made that the Pope is infallible. So, and here we have to see that when something happens on the religious side, it has something to do with what happens on the secular side, because the bourgeois enlightenment, and then the Marxist enlightenment, and then the Freudian enlightenment, and then the political developments and so on, made like when you are ill, you have to pull all your energies together. So the church thought that centralization in one point there could make it more defensible against these atheistic and whatever attacks which came from the secular world. I think we underestimate, when we see also ISIS and so on, we underestimate what a threat we constitute for them. If you, for instance, impose on them this rational thing of separation of church and state and so on, that seems to be so normal for us, and it rescued us so that our civil war stopped, after this 30-year war. So, but for them, that means separation of church and state. That means privatization of religion. That means religion has to go out of the state, out of civil society, out of the family. Religion is then only in the heart that castrates religion. It's like if you say to somebody, lover, you cannot tell anybody that you love this guy because he's married or whatever. That suffocates love. Love wants to manifest itself. And so religion has to manifest itself in family life, in economic life, in political life. So people also say to the Pope, you have to stay out of politics, you have to stay out of economics, you have to stay out of ecology. What the hell do you have to do with ecology? That's all secular stuff. You have nothing to do with it. You push the poor guy, into the Vatican and into his own heart. A religion has to unfold itself in order to be alive. And if you push it back to its essence in there or whatever, it will simply not be alive. So that means it's a threat of life and death which it poses them. So that means we then have to explain to that. I personally think, and I talked to the Ayatollah and said, that the only way out to stop these civil wars is to take religion out of the state and put it into civil society. They say, look what happened to you Christians, there's nothing left of you, and so on. So, well, something is left of us. And ways have to be found below, as long as the Shiites are in control of the Baghdad government and the Sunnis are outside, you will have a civil war. And there's nothing, and it was with us the same way. Only because of the bourgeoisie taking the church out of the state. We did it here in the colonies. The Anglican Church was a state church, and we took it out of the state and put it into civil society as a private organization. And they did very well. The churches did very well in civil society. With symbolical gestures and cooperation and so on. But the real task which is there is that these two churches will finally reunite again, and that will, well, it has happened already. The church will not ask that the priests have to live in celibacy. As a matter of fact, I think the Roman Church can learn from the patriarchs. Only the bishops are not married. The priests are all married. When I taught in Ioannina in Greece, they were all the little pastors with their wives and their arms. They're going through the streets and having the long habits on and so on. It was a beautiful picture there. So Rome can learn here from the other patriarchs in many ways. So, for instance, they have never dogmatized after the Middle Ages. They made new dogmas. Only the West went on to make new dogmas. The East never did. And I think it was very wise that they didn't do it. The less you have, the better it is. So, nevertheless, that is the task, objectively, which would have to be fulfilled. And then we have to see how close the Pope comes, how Francis comes to this. And if it is only symbolical now, or only the Near Eastern situation, or if it would really, and that would of course send a real message also to the Anglican community, which is in very bad shape because it is split. The Episcopalians, the Anglicans had to call themselves Episcopalians when the King of England was no longer the head of the church, and so they have this homosexual issue, and the Archbishop in England isn't going along with it. And there you see another thing which could come about with this. If I go to my friends in Three Rivers, I mean, I don't know if you have visited that. It is an Anglican Benedictine monastery, and they have done the liturgical reform which the council brought in. Now, but Rome says that my dear Father William, the guest priest, who is a wonderful theologian too, that when he celebrates his Mass, it is a missa secca. It is a dry Mass. It's not valid. So could one not do something about this now? Right? These are the real questions. What did the Pope would have the Pope to do? The Pope, when Henry VIII, and he had the least reason to separate, but when he separated his church from Rome, then England was put under the interdict. That means nobody was able anymore to ring the bells. No weddings, no ordinations, nothing. Dead church. So, but they didn't fall down and play dead, but they went on. And so the Archbishop of Canterbury and so on, they ordained priests. And this ordination was against the interdict. So it was forbidden. That means on the legal level, by canon law, they did the wrong thing. And they went on for generations to do that. And so the people in town who are ordained, there is a woman who is also lesbian, is a beautiful woman, and she is fought for the ordination first, and she fought for the lesbian status and so on. But she thinks she is ordained, and Rome simply says you're ordained, but it is not valid. Now, could the same situation we have in China? So in China, there is a church which is open in public, and they work together with the government, and they ordain priests, but by Roman standards, these priests are not ordained legitimately. There's an underground church, and they ordain normally and validly. So now, we have to ask the Pope, does the Pope have the possibility, not only does he lose face, but can he, by his own standards, do something about this? Well, he could say that the interdict was imposed in England, and that was a disciplinary message, disciplinary measure. And on the other hand, we have to deal with the sacramental type of theology. And if you are ordained in a normal way, then you are ordained. And disciplinary measures do not interfere with this. So Rome could easily separate those two and say, okay, you were ordained the right way, in spite of the fact that you did it in disobedience to the Bishop of Rome. You were in community with the Bishop of Rome and you did not obey him. That was a bad thing, but sacramentally you were in good shape, and then the whole thing would be settled. And there's this little word of unequal, and there is this little word there about interdict, and they cannot get over it. So this is the task which has to be done, right? And we don't want to be arbitrary, impose something on people to do something against their own interpretation of reality and orientation of action. So we have to respect what Jewish people, Muslims, popes, whatever, and so on. That is important. So by inner criticism, we call that. Okay, so that was our issue of the day. As far as the visit in Havana, it's just south of us here. It's not even too far away, and it happens, and it has consequences then not only in the religious realm, in the churches, but as we started out, it has also international relations. So the Cold War must not start any longer. Again, because this time it may not end so well as it did the first time. Both together, the Slavic world, and since 50 years I'm traveling back and forth between the Slavic and the American world in order to see who does the better thing in the whole thing and who moves better. When I say this, moves better, there is a task which they have to fulfill. The Slavic world emphasizes solidarity. We emphasize personal autonomy. We lack in solidarity, otherwise we would have health insurance for everybody. They lack in an autonomy in terms of initiative and so on. They drive you crazy. They have wonderful land and so on, but they just don't move, and thereby invite all of us other people to come in who will do something better with this beautiful black Ukrainian soil. So I was standing in Kiev once behind a line of Russians, and they couldn't make up their mind where the hell they wanted to fly. And somehow it made me nervous, but I waited patiently. And then finally they got the ticket. God knows where they wanted to go. But 10 minutes later they came back and had the wrong ticket. I mean, if there is a fascist around, he will take over the whole store. So this is, I don't know why that is so, it's not entirely clear. Because it's an intelligent country. It's huge. I mean, Kiev is just the beginning, you know. Then comes the Ural, you know, and in the Ural it just starts, you know. I mean, you never get to Vladivostok, you know. It's certainly not 2 or 3 days flying or whatever. So, and when I have them all together there in every year we have this course on civil society and religion and civil society. So they come from Vladivostok and fly all the way down there and so on. So it is huge, it is rich, it is powerful, it is full of wonderful people like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. They have music, culture. It's an unbelievable wealth. And so we should not make them angry. It's not very good to make them angry. If they get angry, then you do not know what they will do.
Yeah.
So, and therefore I'm so happy that our Secretary of State and theirs met now in Munich, and that they will, and that the Russians won. There's something in the American character. They must not win. Why the hell? If they have the more rational idea, they should maybe win. So the Russians had the idea that you cannot fight Assad, the legitimate government, and the opponent at the same time. So let them be there for a little while, and then have a democratic process in which you throw them out if you want to throw them out. That's the rational way to do. Now, since years and years now, 4 years now, we go the wrong track. Now the Russians come in, they build huge airports with hundreds of airplanes and so on. And Aleppo, they bombed the hell out of Aleppo there, and one doesn't know exactly, whom they bombed, because there is a so-called Free Syrian Army, which was about 12 people when we counted the last time. It's not entirely clear what they are bombing, because there is, and yesterday 2 American airplanes appeared there over Aleppo. And they bombed, and it's not entirely clear what they bombed or if they bombed anything at all. We denied it, of course, that we bombed, but we do that very often. So nevertheless, there is this beautiful old city of Aleppo, and it's all in ruins. So but it is almost, when people move to the front, the Greeks or Romans or we or whatever, you bomb the hell out of what is behind you there. So one has to be careful that those who go into the niche in history should at least be preserved in the niche and not annihilated in the whole process. So unbelievable things. We come from there, Euphrates Tigris area, Iraq, and so on. That is Ur, where Abraham came from. So our religion, our civilization, our language, whatever, writing and so on, comes from there. So, but there is a certain thing, in nature too. When you progress, then you kill everything behind it. So, but the sharks are still there. The sharks are such a beautiful consolation, because it's a tremendous killing machine, the shark. But there are much better ones in the meantime. But the shark stays. Nevertheless, he was there already before this asteroid there got into the Caribbean and so on. So he survived the whole thing. So therefore, I think that cultures which have now moved out of history, or history has moved beyond them, that they are preserved as much as possible. So nevertheless, we cannot separate, the religious, so the Patriarch and the Patriarch of the West and the Patriarch of Moscow, but they are interconnected. One comes from this Slavic world, and the other comes from the American world. And that they are meeting has not only religious, it also has a secular dimension to it as well.
Rudy,
Yes.
I have a question on the subject of restoration. You've said quite a bit on the role of the Pope within the context of the both theological and institutional inertia of Roman Catholicism. With the idea of restoration, it has a connotation, if not a denotation, of a returning to something that was either lost or was in danger of being lost. And if we were going to explore the question, is Francis I a pope of restoration? What is it that he is supposed to be restoring, and what is he restoring it from?
Right. So, if we would do what we just said about the Anglican Church and the patriarchs and so on, that would be a real reform. It would not be a revolution as such, but it would be a reform. If he would call Jerusalem II, that means a no council, which he hasn't done and will probably not do, and so on, that could very well be a revolutionary act. So, but we have to say what would mean restoration. And so let me take a little bit time for this, because it is worthwhile to go back where the man comes from and what the tragedy is in which he is involved.
Rudy?
Yes.
We got less than 20 minutes too.
Okay. Well, maybe we take the movie the next time, because I think that's important to make that clear. So, okay, the John the 23rd is a good focus point, because Francis somehow is compared with him, and they say this is another John the 23rd. So John the 23rd was a very pastoral pope, and so they have that in common, pastoral and loving the people and so on and so on. Okay, so who was John the 23rd? He came from Venice, and he was called from Venice. He was the Archbishop of Venice, and then he was chosen, and he gave himself the name John the 23rd. Now, little gestures like this, giving yourself a name like Francis or whatever, is a program, right? So, who was John the 23rd? There was another one before. You also have to think, you know, a businessman thinks in terms of years, a statesman in terms of 100 years, a church thinks in 1,000 years or so. So he remembered that there was a John Pope 23rd before. And nobody in these 400 years had taken, 500 years, had taken that name, because they were all ashamed of this name, John. Now, John was Jesus' beloved disciple, so therefore not to call anybody John for 500 years is quite a scandal, because they were 23 already before. So who was that other John the 23rd? Well, during the Council of Constance, and here comes the council, which is always the opponent of the control of the Pope. So even today, when the Pope wants to make an infallible statement, he better does that in conformity with the council. So in order to make it really hit there. So this fellow came, John the 23rd, the first John the 23rd, came from Rome and with his horse and went into Constance and into a restaurant. And in that restaurant, he heard that two popes, there were three popes at the same time, so that you can be glad that you have only one now. So the two had been deposed by the council. So the council cancelled them. And now he thought maybe he would be the one which the council accepted. Then he heard from the council in the evening that they would depose him too. Then he took his horse and rode away to the Black Forest. And next morning the council came together and looked at him, and he wasn't there. Then they sent the police after him, and the police caught him in the Black Forest and brought him back, and the council sentenced him to 5 years of hard labor in Venice. That is the connection. See, religious people think in historical terms, and these historical terms are not only fact or data, they have meaning. They are full of meaning, sucked full of meaning. So now this Pope ran away. By the way, that's the same council who promised Hus from Bohemia that he could come and talk to the council and then could go back and nothing would happen to him. No, they caught him and burned him on a stone in Constance, and the stone is still there. Burned him alive. Hus. He was one of the predecessors of Luther. Another one was Wycliffe in England, which Thomas More here burned alive. Followers of Wycliffe under Henry VIII. Okay, so just an aside. So, nevertheless, one pope ran away from the council. The other pope now called in a council. So that means now the Council of Constance, the pope ran away, and the new pope brings in the Second Vatican Council. That was almost a revolutionary thing, but there is still a reformed one. It was not restoration. So we want to see, what restoration means and so on. So, but he also called in that committee to decide on birth control, so that Catholics could use artificial birth control. And this committee decided for it, and then Paul VI cancelled it, and that was restoration. There's restoration. Cancelled it and wrote the encyclical Humanae Vitae, in which half of it is modern. That means sexuality is an expression of our love and our tenderness to our partner, but he kept the Aristotelian part of purposiveness, namely that every act, sexual act, had to be open for the child. I belong to a group in Germany where we made the recommendation that not every sexual act, but that the marriage as such should be open for the child. That would have made a great difference, but it was rejected. That is restoration. And so you have a pope who tries to go progress, and then you have countervailing for, or fear, terrible fear of Paul VI. He became neurotic. He took the keys away from the seminarians, that they could not go out to the movie at night, and so on and so on. In all kinds of little things. That was restoration. That means after the Second Vatican Council, a movement of restoration set in, which then Paul VI, one of the popes, died prematurely, and then came John Paul II, and then came Benedict. These are all restoration popes. And the question is now if he, as their successor, will stop the restoration or if he will go on with it. Or if he will make reform symbolisms and at the same time continues the restoration, which in the extreme case can be called a betrayal of the Second Vatican Council. That is why you have so many people, thousands of priests left the priesthood, and recently even 2 up here in the city again left, and they're still leaving. Nuns left, thousands of nuns left, and so on. So that is why you have all these hopes concentrating on this Pope. Will he stop the restoration, what he did to the nuns and their reforms and so on, to stop them? What Ratzinger did to the liberation theologians in El Salvador and in Argentina and so on, where he worked together with the CIA and also in Nicaragua, not in Nicaragua, and El
Salvador.
El Salvador, not the other one which had the
Honduras?
Huh? The other one, which had the revolution, the Sandinistas.
Oh, El Salvador.
Nicaragua.
The Sandinista?
No, which one? Where was the Sandinista?
Wait, was that
Sandinistas are
Not Morales?
Nicaragua. So there, the Archbishop worked with the CIA, and so did the Ratzinger, the Inquisitor. So that is an answer to your question, what restoration is. And the same thing now, if that restoration would end, we don't know yet. It hasn't been decided yet. That means he has not made any structural decision, where we could say that has really ended. Now, to canonize Romero may go in this direction, right? Because Romero was repressed because he was supposed to stay on the side of the fascist government, and instead of that, he went to the side of his liberation theologians and the basic Christian community. The fascists killed 70,000 members of the liberation of the Christian basic community people and so on. So here we see very clearly now, but let me say something else about John the 23rd, because there happened a catastrophe before. After the French Revolution, there was a Spanish diplomat who made a prediction that with the fall of the kings, some kind of a dictatorship would be necessary. And he differentiated between a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, which was a good one, and a dictatorship of socialists, which was a bad one. And so what happened then was that you had fascists, that means bourgeois dictatorships, coming up everywhere, and you had socialistic dictatorship in terms of Stalin. So the church then, following this tradition, decided that the bourgeois dictatorships were the lesser evil, and did not make any contact to the proletarian dictatorships, which came from hell, but rather for the bourgeois dictatorship who came from heaven. That is Franco, that is Salazar, that is Hitler, and so on. And so one concorded after the other. So the first concorded was with Mussolini. That is restoration, because Mussolini restored the church state. In 1870, Garibaldi destroyed the church state. The popes remained prisoners in the Vatican, and then in 1933, and before that already, the 20s, the Lateran Treaty was established, and the state was established, and then the German fascists established the Vatican Bank, which is produced those problems all over the place and so on. So the whole thing, the whole Vatican City, which is there today, is a fascist establishment created by the fascists. So therefore then also the Hitler Concordat, which is still valid in the German Federal Republic. That means the relationships with the Vatican are regulated by Hitler's Concordat. The priests are paid by the state and so on. The church will never get it so good, and therefore they want to keep it. Until the Social Democrats will blow it up someday. So, but the day hasn't come yet. So that is restoration. See, fascism means counter-revolution. So Hitler said, "I am the greatest, most conservative revolutionary ever." You know who said that too? Reagan. I am the most conservative revolutionary. A conservative revolutionary is a counter-revolutionary. And a counter-revolutionary means counter against what?
Right.
So if there was a revolution, then, and you go against it, and you want to undo it, and you want to restore the situation before, then that is restoration.
Right.
So therefore, we sent 12 capitalistic troops against Lenin. There are still 8,000 Americans buried in Murmansk. Then came Hitler with 4 million people, and then came the neoliberal counter-revolution of 1989, which came to its end in Kiev recently, where Putin said that's the end of it. And so there will be no other counter-revolution anymore, and that's why we hate his guts. And by the way, in Kiev, you know, a combination of neoliberals and fascists. They burned the synagogue down, which had just been built in Kiev. When I came to Kiev the first time, they remembered that when the Germans marched into Kiev, they killed 180 Jews on the first day. I explored further 30 miles out of Kiev. There is a quarry, and in this quarry, 36,000 Jews were killed, not by Cyclone B, but they were shot, machine gunned down. And only a year ago, or not even a year, a German woman found an album of her father, who was a German flyer, and he flew over Kiev when that shooting took place. But he took only the clothes which they had to take off. They were shot naked. So they put all their clothes, over 30,000 people, and there he flew up and down and took the pictures of the shirts and the trousers and so on, laying there. So if there are Holocaust deniers or whatever, even if there was no Cyclone B, there was a lot of shooting before.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting how the language of restoration is a kind of mythology that is often co-opted by a lot of parties. I mean, speaking from like the Reformed Presbyterian tradition, in our tradition, it is very much a reformation, but it has often been couched in the language of restoration, saying, well, we're just going to go back to what the Bible says.
Right, yeah.
We're restoring the Bible. We're taking it away from the Pope, and Calvin was very anti-Pope, except for Gregory I. He said Gregory I was the last good Pope, but all the others, he said, were terrible. And so it's the language of restoration, whereas in reality it is a reformation.
Yeah.
And but it's almost a neophobia, a fear of the new, and in favor of the paleophilia, the love of the old. We're really restoring what Jesus and the apostles intended that was corrupted, and we're going to restore it, but really they're reforming it. But the way they use the language is very kind of twisted.
Yeah, there are no distortions of it, but it's quite sure that out of fear, the popes, after the council, and Opus Dei and other people with them, did a real restoration, not to Jesus, but a restoration to the 19th century. And with Benedict, it was particularly powerful, and that's why he fell. When you see what Benedict's case was, the church had a theory which was Scholasticism, and it held it together, and Thomas Aquinas had produced it, and so on. And then suddenly, and you had it here, Western Michigan University and Toronto University worked together with this saving it was called neo-scholasticism, and so on. And then during the time of the council, this theory collapsed. And suddenly you had a church without this powerful binding everything together by the same scholastic theory. And so so what to do now? Ratzinger was not a scholastic but a patristic person. That means he had studied the church fathers, so he went back to antiquity. So they thought maybe when we lose scholasticism, maybe we can go back to Origenus and Augustine and so on, and then have a new model, have a new theory, and then can take up the struggle with modernity, because we have to defend ourselves, like ISIS, They have to defend themselves. And we do not deny, that the Enlightenment is an endangerment of the old religions. They cannot stay the way they are, So, nevertheless, so therefore he tried, and he made a frontal attack against modernity. So for instance, he said, the predecessor, John the 23rd, said, well, the Inquisition may have been wrong with Galileo. Now comes Ratzinger, not on the basis of scholasticism, but antiquity really. He said, no, the Inquisition was right. Right away, the secular university in Rome disinvited him. He was not able to speak there, see, and the thing became deeper and deeper. And then everybody who opened up in the church toward modernity, that means over 90 theologians, the most outstanding ones, they were all fired. They had nothing to eat anymore. They were fired. They were thrown out. Here you have one here, Fox. Fox in Chicago. See,
Yeah.
Fox was a Dominican,
Yeah.
and a specialist, Matthew Fox.
Yeah.
He was a specialist in Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart, and was set free. After his death, when he could not defend himself, they sentenced him again. And also this because of misunderstanding. They said he was a pantheist. He was a panentheist. E-N, two little
Yes.
things which the Inquisition guys could not grasp.
Right.
And therefore this man for 700 years is, well, it's quite in heaven there, but not here. So, so nevertheless, that's something real now. If the Pope now would reinstate those 80 people, all wonderful, devoted people and so on, and would discuss it with them really. See, if you go to the Holy Inquisition, you cannot even take a lawyer with you. So archaic this thing is, Boff, for instance, one of the liberation theologians, he went to Rome, he took 3 cardinals with him, and they were not allowed to go in and defend him in the trial there and so on. So this has to stop. This is the Roman system. And the question is, the Roman system is not identical with Catholicism. It's something else. And the question is what he will do with the Roman system, what he will do with these 90 theologians, and so on. Some were dead already in the meantime. What he will do. This one here, Fox, went to the Anglican, to the Episcopalians, and found a home there, and so on. So there is a lot to be done, real things which are more than symbolism. Just think of the Orthodoxy we talked about, and the Archbishop of Canterbury, about the Anglican community, which really needs all. See, all what they did with the Anglican community is, those who want to stay with the old standards, they set up a diocese in London where the Anglican bishops could move in. So 4 of them did move in. They joined again the mother church. And we are out in the wilderness now, or whatever. So, but all this could be settled now. But this is the criterion. Are these the real things have to be settled? And symbolism is nice, and it points away from restoration to reform and maybe to revolution and so on. But does it really happen? And what happens today in Havana and so on is still symbolism. It's still not the real thing. So it's the history itself which poses problems. And the question is if he will face those problems. If he can. If he is free enough in terms of his own theoretical apparatus which he carries in himself. Will it only be pastoral? Which, I don't say only, right? It's beautiful to be pastoral, of course. But you cannot simply say to a homosexual, we love the sinner, but we hate the sin.
Right.
When you have to look through the eyes of homosexuals. I don't understand it, but I try nevertheless to look through the eyes. And so, when they love each other, to say, and they care for each other, and they care for each other until they die, and so on, you cannot simply say, I love you, but your relationship is sinful, and so on. It doesn't go. It's not an adequate answer.
Read.
Yes.
If he comes to that conclusion, the statement that you made, do you think where on his own initiative is they going to come from his deductive reasoning and thoughts, or where
No,
a pope?
he can only do that in discourse with his cardinals,
Yes.
with the episcopate of different countries. He would have to call in a third Vatican Council or Jerusalem II or something like this. He calls instead, he didn't call a council, he called an international synod of bishops to deal with the family thing, but when you read the document it is here, it is so complicated. You see how difficult it would be to move from the family to civil society or to the state or to history or to religious things and so on. So it is not simple, but he cannot simply by his own mind, spin something. He would have to do it in community. He is not a dictator. The canon law encircles him. So there were fights. On one side he had this tremendous, powerful position, but at the same time there were hundreds of years of attempts to limit him, to limit his power. Right? So he cannot do what he has to negotiate with people, And he wants to retire too someday. He doesn't want to die in the office. So that
must
makes
he
him
convince then those participants to be in the same frame of mind?
Yeah, I mean,
or is-
he could ally himself with those Reformed theologians, with those progressive theologians, right? But the other two have already put into position all those bishops, who are conservative or arch-conservative and restoration bishops. So there are two popes who use their whole time to put, like we do with the Supreme Court or whatever, who put, their own people in there, and they are relatively young now. They will stay there for another 20 years. So, but you have to go concretely. What would he have to do, in order to say inter pares, among equals, He would have to ask the theologians, if that's possible. He would have to ask the canon lawyers, if that is possible, the historians, how the whole thing has to develop, and so on. So he cannot simply say, I'm a good man, brothers, I embrace you, and so on and so on, Or that an inner light is shining up, or what? The Rome is not for inner lights, Yeah.
Rudy, we've run just a little bit over time.
Okay, yeah, so we have to, so see you again on next Wednesday, no matter, Friday, no matter what weather.